February 23, 1945. The shattered streets of Elldorf, Germany. Sergeant Nicholas Mashlonas peered through the periscope of his M26 Pershing tank, scanning the rubble-choked intersection ahead. His crew had been warned about the King Tiger, Germany's most formidable armoured vehicle, whose frontal armour was rumoured to be impervious to everything the Allies could throw at it. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. What Mashlonas and his crew didn't know was that their 90mm gun, firing armour-piercing ammunition developed through years of American metallurgical research, would rewrite the tactical assumptions both sides held about heavy tank combat. The Tiger II represented the apex of German armoured design philosophy, an engineering masterpiece that prioritized armour protection and firepower above all other considerations. Its frontal glacis plate measured 150mm thick, sloped at 50 degrees, creating an effective thickness that Allied intelligence calculated as virtually impenetrable. Yet within hours, American tankers would discover that the King Tiger's psychological invincibility was far more fragile than its physical armour. The story of how American heavy tanks challenged German armour supremacy begins not on the battlefields of Germany, but in the urgent deliberations of American ordnance planners who recognized by early 1943 that the M4 Sherman would eventually face opponents it could not defeat. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The development of the M26 Pershing represented a fundamental shift in American tank doctrine. Throughout 1942 and into 1943, American armoured philosophy emphasized mobility and reliability over heavy armour and powerful armament. The M4 Sherman embodied this approach perfectly, combining adequate armour for its intended role with mechanical reliability that German tanks could never match. However, battlefield reports from North Africa and later from Italy revealed a troubling pattern. German tank development was accelerating toward heavier, more heavily armoured designs that the Sherman could not engage effectively from frontal aspects. The Panzer VI Tiger, entering service in late 1942, mounted an 88mm gun behind armour that ranged from 80 to 120mm thick. American tank destroyers with 3-inch or 76mm guns could defeat Tigers under favourable circumstances, but the encounters revealed a capability gap that would only widen as German engineers developed even more formidable designs. Intelligence reports reaching Washington in mid-1943 included fragmentary information about a new German heavy tank under development, eventually designated the Tiger II, or Königstiger. The specifications, when confirmed, proved sobering. The King Tiger would mount the same 88mm KWK 43L71 gun used in the Ferdinand and Jagdpanther tank destroyers, a weapon capable of defeating any Allied tank at ranges exceeding 2,000 meters. Its armour protection would exceed the original Tiger substantially, with frontal glacis armour 150mm thick, sloped at 50 degrees, creating effective thickness approaching 220mm against flat trajectory fire. American ordnance officers recognized immediately that no existing American tank gun could reliably penetrate this armour from frontal aspects. The 76mm M1 gun equipping the improved Sherman variants could not defeat 150mm of armour at any angle or range with standard ammunition. Even the 90mm M3 gun being developed for the new T-26 heavy tank project would struggle against the King Tiger's glacis plate, though calculations suggested it might penetrate the turret front under favourable conditions. The T-26 project, which would eventually become the M26 Pershing, had begun in early 1943 as American ordnance struggled to develop a heavy tank that balanced firepower, armour protection, and mechanical reliability. The design process proved contentious, with competing visions of what American heavy tanks should prioritize. General Leslie McNair, commanding Army Ground Forces, opposed heavy tanks entirely, arguing they would prove mechanically unreliable and logistically burdensome while offering limited tactical advantages over improved medium tanks and dedicated tank destroyers. General Jacob Devers and other armor advocates countered that American forces needed tanks capable of defeating the heaviest German armor in direct engagement, particularly for offensive operations in fortified terrain where maneuver was restricted. The debate consumed months of planning time, while German heavy tank development continued unimpeded. The T-26 design that emerged from these deliberations represented compromises between competing requirements. The vehicle would weigh approximately 42 tons, substantially heavier than the 33-ton M4A3 Sherman, but lighter than the 69-ton King Tiger. Its armor protection included 102 mm of frontal glacis armor sloped at 46 degrees, providing effective thickness comparable to the Panther, but significantly less than the Tiger II. The 90 mm M3 gun represented the most powerful anti-tank weapon yet fitted to an American tank, firing a 24-pound armor-piercing projectile at 853 meters per second muzzle velocity. By comparison, the German 88 mm KK-43 fired a 23-pound projectile at 1,000 meters per second, giving it superior penetrating power at all ranges. The T-26 development program suffered numerous delays through 1943 and into 1944. Ordnance committees repeatedly revised specifications, improving armor protection and mechanical components while attempting to keep weight within acceptable limits. The transmission and final drive systems, critical to reliability, required extensive redesign to handle the increased weight without the catastrophic failures that plagued German heavy tanks. General Motors, Ford Motor Company, and Chrysler all contributed engineering expertise, applying their automotive manufacturing experience to military requirements. Production authorization came frustratingly late. The Army Ground Forces finally approved the T-26 for standardized production as the M26 heavy tank in March 1945, nearly 2 years after the project began. By this time, the war in Europe was entering its final months, with Allied armies already across the Rhine and advancing toward the heart of Germany. The first production M26 tanks arrived at the New York port of embarkation on January 8, 1945. 20 tanks formed the initial shipment, assigned to the 3rd Armored Division and the 9th Armored Division for combat evaluation. Additional shipments followed through January and February, but the numbers remained modest. By the time Germany surrendered on May 8, 1945, only 310 M26 tanks had reached Europe, with barely 1/5 of those seeing any combat action before the war ended. The crews selected to operate these new heavy tanks underwent abbreviated training on unfamiliar equipment. Most American tankers had extensive experience with Sherman variants, understanding their capabilities and limitations intimately through months or years of combat operations. The Pershing represented a fundamentally different vehicle, heavier and less maneuverable than the Sherman, but mounting a gun that offered genuine heavy tank killing capability for the first time in American service. Sergeant Early and his crew from the 3rd Armored Division received their M26 in mid-February 1945, with minimal preparation time. The tank, nicknamed Fireball, bore factory-fresh paint and the new mechanical smell of a vehicle straight from the production line. The crew spent several days familiarizing themselves with the controls, the more spacious turret, the different sight picture through the gunner's periscope, and the distinctive recoil characteristics of the 90 mm gun. They test-fired the main gun at a makeshift range, watching the heavy armor-piercing rounds punch through target plates that would have stopped Sherman fire completely. The penetration performance impressed crews accustomed to the limitations of 75 and 76 mm guns, but questions remained about how the Pershing would perform against actual German heavy armor under combat conditions. Intelligence briefings provided sobering assessments of the King Tiger's capabilities. The Tiger II had entered combat in July 1944, first appearing during the Normandy fighting, where its presence caused considerable alarm among Allied tankers. Reports from units that had encountered King Tigers emphasized the vehicle's nearly impervious frontal armor and devastating long-range firepower. British 17-pounder anti-tank guns, the most powerful Allied anti-tank weapon widely deployed in Normandy, could penetrate King Tiger turret fronts at close range, but struggled against the glacis plate even at point-blank distances. American tank crews learned quickly that engaging King Tigers frontally was suicidal unless overwhelming numbers allowed simultaneous attacks from multiple directions. The preferred tactic involved calling for artillery or air support, while tank destroyers attempted to maneuver for flank shots. This defensive posture, forced by the capability gap between American and German heavy armor, frustrated crews who wanted to engage enemy tanks directly rather than yielding initiative to call for support. The King Tiger's combat debut revealed both its strengths and significant weaknesses that intelligence analysts noted carefully. While the armor protection and firepower were undeniably formidable, the vehicle suffered mechanical reliability problems comparable to earlier German heavy tanks. The Maybach HL 230 engine, originally designed for the 45-ton Panther, struggled to move the much heavier King Tiger effectively. The power-to-weight ratio of less than 10 horsepower per ton made the vehicle slow and ponderous, unable to maneuver quickly in response to tactical developments. German crews reported frequent transmission and final drive failures, particularly when attempting to pivot, turn, or reverse under load. These mechanical problems, combined with Germany's collapsing logistics network and severe fuel shortages by late 1944, meant King Tigers often fought from static defensive positions rather than mobile operations. A King Tiger emplaced in a prepared position with clear fields of fire represented a nearly insurmountable obstacle for attacking Allied armor. However, a King Tiger attempting to maneuver across country or conduct mobile defense faced significant risk of mechanical breakdown that would immobilize it far from maintenance support. By February 1945, American intelligence had compiled detailed information about King Tiger vulnerabilities beyond its problematic mechanics. The turret front, while thick at 185 mm, featured a curved mantlet that created shot traps and areas where effective thickness decreased. The turret side armor measured only 80 mm, vulnerable to 76 mm fire at close range. Most critically, the massive vehicle's weight and bulk made it difficult to conceal, and its limited mobility restricted tactical flexibility once engaged. American ordnance officers calculated that the M26's 90 mm gun, while unable to reliably penetrate the King Tiger's glacis plate, could defeat the turret front at combat ranges using armor-piercing ammunition. The standard M82 armor-piercing capped ballistic cap round could penetrate approximately 170 mm of armor at 1,000 yards when striking perpendicular to the plate. Against the curved turret mantlet, penetration probability decreased but remained possible, particularly at closer ranges where striking velocity increased. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. These calculations, derived from firing range tests against captured German armor plate, remained theoretical until American crews could test them under actual combat conditions. The opportunity came in late February 1945, as American forces advanced through the Rhineland toward Cologne. Task Force Wellborn, named for its commander Lieutenant Colonel John Wellborn, spearheaded the 3rd Armored Division's drive toward the strategically important city. The task force included Company F of the 33rd Armored Regiment, which had just received 3 M26 Pershing tanks as replacements for battle-damaged Shermans. The Pershings stood out visually among the familiar Sherman silhouettes, taller and more angular with their distinctive cast turrets and long 90 mm guns. German reconnaissance elements, observing American movements, reported the presence of new heavy tanks, though initial reports incorrectly identified them as British Churchills or captured Panthers based on their unfamiliar profiles. February 23rd dawned cold and overcast, with low clouds limiting air observation and close air support availability. Task Force Wellborn advanced cautiously through the broken terrain west of Cologne, encountering sporadic resistance from German infantry and anti-tank gun positions. The advancing American column moved through the small town of Elldorf, clearing scattered resistance and securing key road junctions that would support subsequent advances toward the Rhine crossings. At approximately 2 in the afternoon, forward elements of the task force reported enemy armor ahead, hull down behind debris near the Elldorf railroad station. The report identified the vehicle as a Panther or Tiger based on its size and the distinctive sound of its engine, audible across the relatively quiet battlefield. Company F commander radioed Sergeant Early in Fireball, ordering the Pershing forward to engage the unidentified German tank, while Sherman tanks provided support from covered positions. Early guided Fireball through the narrow streets, the 42-ton Pershing moving ponderously compared to the more agile Shermans the crew had previously operated. The extra weight and lower power-to-weight ratio made the vehicle feel sluggish, particularly when turning or accelerating from stops. However, the psychological security of operating a tank with genuine heavy armor and a powerful gun offset the mobility limitations for crews accustomed to the Sherman's thin protection. The Pershing emerged from cover onto a relatively open stretch of road approximately 700 yards from the railroad station. Early's gunner, Corporal Clarence Smoyer, identified the target immediately through his periscope. The distinctive long gun barrel and massive turret confirmed this was no Panther. The vehicle was a King Tiger, the most formidable tank Germany had produced, positioned to command the approach routes into Elldorf's center. The German tank was oriented at a slight angle, presenting approximately 3/4 of its frontal aspect to the approaching American vehicle. The glacis plate, sloped dramatically and impossibly thick, offered no viable target for the Pershing's 90mm gun. However, the turret, turned partially toward the American position, presented the curved mantlet and turret front as potential aim points if Smoyer could achieve a hit before the German crew completed their traverse and fired first. The engagement that followed lasted perhaps 15 seconds, though participants would later describe it as seeming both instantaneous and drawn out across an eternity. Smoyer, one of the most experienced gunners in the regiment with dozens of combat engagements behind him, laid his reticle on the King Tiger's turret front, just left of the main gun. The range was close enough that the armor-piercing round would strike with nearly full velocity, maximizing penetration potential against the curved cast steel. Early gave the fire command. Smoyer squeezed the trigger. The 90mm gun roared, its heavy recoil rocking the 42-ton Pershing backward slightly as the massive projectile crossed 700 yards in less than 1 second. The armor-piercing round struck the King Tiger's turret front with tremendous force, the impact clearly visible even through the periscope's limited field of view. For a fraction of a second, nothing happened. Then smoke began pouring from the King Tiger's hatches as secondary fires ignited inside the turret. The German crew had no opportunity to return fire. The penetrating round had entered the fighting compartment, striking ammunition or causing catastrophic spalling that killed or wounded the crew instantly. Within moments, flames erupted from the engine deck as fire spread through the vehicle's interior. The King Tiger, Germany's most heavily armored operational tank, had been defeated from frontal aspect by an American tank mounting a gun that German intelligence had assessed as inadequate for the task. The psychological impact of this single engagement rippled through both American and German units far beyond its immediate tactical significance. American tank crews, who had learned through bitter experience to fear German heavy armor and avoid frontal engagements, discovered that the M26 Pershing could defeat even the formidable King Tiger under favorable conditions. This knowledge transformed tactical calculations and crew confidence, making American tankers more willing to engage German armor directly rather than yielding initiative to call for support. German tank crews, particularly those operating King Tigers who had grown accustomed to near invulnerability from frontal attack, learned that American tanks now mounted guns capable of penetrating their armor. This revelation forced more cautious tactics and undermined the psychological security that thick armor had provided. A King Tiger crew that believed its frontal armor guaranteed survival could fight aggressively, taking calculated risks to achieve superior firing positions. A crew that knew American tanks could kill them frontally fought more defensively, prioritizing survival over aggressive tactical action. The engagement at Elldorf represented the first confirmed instance of an M26 Pershing destroying a King Tiger in combat, but it would not be the last. As additional Pershing tanks reached frontline units through late February and March 1945, American crews gained experience with the new heavy tank's capabilities and limitations. The 90mm gun proved consistently effective against King Tiger turrets at combat ranges, typically 600 to 1,000 yards, where American tank engagements most frequently occurred in the close terrain of Western Germany. Against the glacis plate, results remained poor except at very close range and favorable impact angles. The extreme slope and thickness meant that even the powerful 90mm armor-piercing rounds typically ricocheted or failed to achieve complete penetration when striking the lower hull. This limitation meant M26 crews still needed to employ sound tactics, seeking favorable firing angles and coordinating with supporting elements rather than relying solely on their guns' penetrating power. The mechanical reliability of early production, Pershing tanks proved generally good, though not exceptional by the standards American tankers had learned to expect from Sherman variants. The Torque-matic transmission, a complex design that had required extensive development, functioned reliably under most conditions but demanded more careful operation than the straightforward manual transmission in the Sherman. The Ford GAF engine, an enlarged version of the excellent GAA Vate that powered late-model Shermans, provided adequate power for the heavier vehicle, though crews noted the Pershing felt underpowered compared to the more agile Sherman. These mechanical characteristics reflected the fundamental challenge American designers faced when developing the M26. The vehicle needed sufficient armor to survive hits from German tank guns, sufficient firepower to defeat German heavy armor, and sufficient reliability to function effectively under field conditions with minimal maintenance. These requirements pushed against weight and power limitations, forcing compromises that resulted in a tank that excelled in no single category, but performed adequately across all requirements. By contrast, the King Tiger represented German design philosophy taken to its logical extreme. The vehicle prioritized armor protection and firepower absolutely, accepting severe compromises in mobility, fuel consumption, and mechanical reliability to achieve maximum battlefield capability. Under ideal conditions, with adequate fuel, trained crew, and prepared defensive positions, the King Tiger was devastatingly effective. Under the actual conditions of late war Germany, with fuel critically scarce, crew training abbreviated, and mobile operations impossible due to mechanical fragility, the King Tiger's theoretical advantages often remained unrealized. American intelligence officers studying the Elldorf engagement and subsequent Pershing versus King Tiger encounters noted patterns that revealed broader truths about heavy tank combat. The M26, while technically inferior to the King Tiger in armor protection and gun performance, proved tactically superior in actual employment due to better crew training, superior supporting elements, and adequate mechanical reliability that allowed aggressive maneuver. American Pershing crews coordinated closely with infantry, tank destroyers, artillery forward observers, and when weather permitted, close air support. This integrated combined arms approach meant that even when the Pershing could not immediately defeat enemy armor through direct fire, supporting elements could suppress, disable, or destroy German tanks through indirect means. German King Tiger crews, by contrast, often fought in isolation with minimal infantry support, no air cover, inadequate artillery support, and uncertain communications with higher headquarters. These deficiencies in combined arms coordination meant that even technically superior tanks could be defeated through tactical isolation and systematic reduction. The production numbers told their own story about comparative national industrial capacity. Germany manufactured 489 King Tigers between January 1944 and March 1945, representing a substantial commitment of scarce resources including high-grade armor plate, precision machining capacity, and experienced factory workers. This limited production reflected Germany's constrained industrial base, which struggled to maintain output even of existing designs under intensifying Allied strategic bombing and raw material shortages. The United States manufactured over 2,000 M26 Pershing tanks between November 1944 and June 1945. Despite the late production authorization and competing priorities for industrial capacity, American factories continued producing Shermans simultaneously with Pershing production, demonstrating manufacturing flexibility that German industry had never achieved during wartime conditions. This production disparity meant that even if the King Tiger held technical advantages over the Pershing in direct comparison, American numerical superiority would prove decisive at operational and strategic levels. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The broader context of late February 1945 shaped how both American and German forces employed their heavy tanks. By this stage of the war, Germany's strategic position had become hopeless. Soviet armies had advanced deep into eastern Germany, capturing Silesia's industrial regions and approaching Berlin from the east. American and British forces had reached the Rhine, preparing for the final crossing into Germany's heartland. The Luftwaffe had been driven from the skies, allowing Allied tactical air forces to dominate the battlefield whenever weather permitted flight operations. German tank production continued, but finished vehicles often sat immobile at factory complexes due to fuel shortages. Experienced tank crews had been killed or captured in previous battles, forcing Germany to man its remaining armour with hastily trained replacements who lacked the skill to exploit their vehicles' technical capabilities. The logistical network that supplied spare parts, ammunition, and fuel to frontline units had largely collapsed under Allied bombing and the loss of territory containing critical transportation infrastructure. American forces, by contrast, operated with overwhelming material superiority, supported by logistics networks that functioned with remarkable efficiency despite the distances involved. Fuel, ammunition, and spare parts flowed forward to combat units with consistency that German forces could not match even earlier in the war, when their position was far stronger. This logistical security meant American tank crews could operate aggressively, knowing that mechanical problems could be repaired quickly and ammunition expenditure would be replenished without delay. The psychological dimension of heavy tank combat proved as important as material capabilities in determining tactical outcomes. German tankers, who had dominated battlefields in 1940 and 1941 through superior training, doctrine, and equipment quality, now fought desperately against opponents who exceeded them in every category except individual tank specifications. The knowledge that American tanks now included heavy variants capable of defeating King Tigers undermined German morale further, reinforcing the growing conviction that defeat was inevitable regardless of individual tactical successes. American tank crews experienced the opposite psychological trajectory. Early war humiliations, particularly the defeat at Kasserine Pass in February 1943, where inexperienced American units were mauled by veteran German armoured formations, had been overcome through hard-won experience and improved equipment. By early 1945, American tankers knew they possessed superior numbers, better logistics, overwhelming air support, and now heavy tanks that could engage German armour on more equal terms. This confidence translated directly into tactical aggressiveness and willingness to accept calculated risks in pursuit of mission objectives. The engagement at Elldorf on February 23 became legendary within the 3rd Armoured Division almost immediately. Word spread quickly through American units that a Pershing had knocked out a King Tiger from frontal aspect, something Sherman crews had learned was virtually impossible with their lighter guns. The story, embellished slightly in retelling, but fundamentally accurate in its essential details, provided tangible proof that American heavy tanks could compete with Germany's best. Motion picture cameramen attached to the 3rd Armoured Division had filmed the engagement, capturing dramatic footage of the burning King Tiger and the victorious Pershing crew. This footage reached American audiences through newsreel distribution, providing home front viewers with visual evidence of American armoured superiority. The propaganda value of showing German supertanks destroyed by American equipment proved considerable, reinforcing public confidence that the war's end approached with certain Allied victory. German propaganda attempted to counter these narratives with claims that King Tiger losses resulted from overwhelming Allied numerical superiority rather than technical defeat. These explanations contained truth, as Allied material advantages were indeed decisive at operational levels. However, they could not erase the fundamental reality that individual King Tigers were being destroyed in direct combat by American tanks, undermining claims of German technological invincibility that propaganda had promoted for years. The last weeks of February and early March 1945 saw additional M26 Pershing tanks committed to combat as production vehicles reached European ports and were rushed forward to replacement depots. The deployment pattern reflected urgent tactical needs rather than systematic organizational planning. Individual Pershing tanks or small groups were attached to Sherman-equipped tank battalions as heavy support, creating mixed formations that combined the Sherman's mobility and reliability with the Pershing's heavier firepower and armor protection. This ad hoc employment prevented comprehensive assessment of Pershing capabilities in pure heavy tank formations, though it provided valuable tactical flexibility. Sherman crews welcomed the additional firepower when encountering German heavy armor, while Pershing crews appreciated having more numerous and agile Shermans available to exploit breakthroughs and pursue defeated enemies. The combination proved effective in the fluid combat conditions of March 1945 as American armies advanced rapidly against collapsing German resistance. Tank battles during this final phase of the European War rarely featured the dramatic armor duels that characterized earlier campaigns in North Africa or Normandy. German tank units, starved of fuel and replacement vehicles, could not maneuver freely to seek advantageous engagements. Instead, they fought from prepared defensive positions, attempting to halt or delay American advances through defensive firepower rather than mobile counterattacks. This tactical reality favored American combined arms teams that could employ artillery, air support, and infantry to reduce German strongpoints systematically. Pershing tanks operating in this environment provided direct fire support for advancing infantry, engaged fortified positions with their powerful 90mm guns, and served as mobile reserves capable of defeating any German armor encountered. The psychological security of operating a heavy tank that could defeat King Tigers allowed crews to fight more aggressively than Sherman crews facing the same opposition. This tactical confidence, perhaps more than pure technical capability, justified the Pershing's late war deployment despite its limited numbers. The crossing of the Rhine in early March 1945 marked the beginning of the end for organized German resistance in the West. American forces seized the Ludendorff Bridge at Remagen intact on March 7th, establishing a bridgehead on the eastern bank that German counterattacks failed to eliminate despite desperate efforts. Additional crossings followed at multiple points along the river as American and British forces poured into Germany's industrial heartland. M26 Pershing tanks crossed the Rhine as part of the Exploitation forces, their heavy armor and firepower, providing security for bridgehead expansion operations. German attempts to destroy the Remagen Bridge through artillery fire, V-2 rocket attacks, and even experimental jet aircraft strikes demonstrated the strategic importance of the crossing, but could not prevent Allied forces from consolidating their position. Within days, engineer battalions had constructed multiple pontoon bridges alongside the captured span, allowing unlimited vehicle traffic to flow eastward. The terrain beyond the Rhine favored defensive operations, with numerous river valleys, forested hills, and small towns providing ideal positions for German anti-tank guns and dug-in armor. However, Germany's capacity to organize coherent defensive lines had collapsed under the weight of simultaneous offensives from east and west. Units fought in isolation, often unaware of friendly forces nearby, while American combined arms teams systematically reduced each strongpoint before advancing to the next objective. Pershing tanks engaged a variety of German armored vehicles during the Rhine crossing operations and subsequent exploitation. These encounters provided combat data about the 90mm gun's effectiveness against different armor types under varying conditions. Against Panzer IV tanks, the most numerous German tanks still in service, the 90mm gun proved devastatingly effective at all combat ranges, easily penetrating frontal armor that had been adequate against earlier generation Allied tanks, but stood no chance against the powerful American gun. Panther tanks, which had terrorized American armor in Normandy with their combination of mobility, armor protection, and lethal long-range firepower, now faced an opponent that could engage them frontally with reasonable probability of penetration. The Panther's mantlet and turret front remained vulnerable to 90mm fire at typical engagement ranges of 600 to 1,000 yards. The glacis, plate, while still resistant, could be penetrated at closer ranges or when struck at favorable angles that reduced effective thickness. King Tiger encounters remained relatively rare due to the limited number of these vehicles Germany had produced, and their high attrition rate from combat losses and mechanical failures. When American Pershing tanks did engage King Tigers, the pattern established at Elldorf repeated consistently. The turret proved vulnerable to 90mm armor-piercing fire at combat ranges, while the glacis plate remained highly resistant. American crews learned to target the turret specifically, accepting that body hits against the lower hull would likely ricochet without achieving penetration. The mechanical reliability of the Pershing tanks under sustained combat operations proved generally satisfactory, though crews noted several recurring issues that would require attention in future production. The transmission, while adequately durable for most operations, occasionally suffered from hard shifting between gears, particularly when the vehicle was cold or operating in dusty conditions that contaminated the gearbox oil. The final drives demonstrated good durability under normal use but could fail prematurely if drivers attempted aggressive pivot turns on hard surfaces, a maneuver the heavy vehicle's drivetrain struggled to tolerate. The suspension system, using torsion bars rather than the vertical volute spring suspension employed on Sherman tanks, provided excellent cross-country mobility and crew comfort. However, the complexity of the torsion bar system made field repairs more difficult than the simpler Sherman suspension, requiring specialized tools and greater technical expertise from maintenance crews. These reliability concerns, while significant for future development, remained minor compared to the catastrophic mechanical problems that plagued German heavy tanks throughout their service lives. By late March 1945, American armies had advanced deep into central Germany, encircling the Ruhr industrial region and trapping hundreds of thousands of German troops in a pocket that would surrender in mid-April. The pace of advance accelerated as German resistance crumbled, with some units advancing over 50 miles in single days against scattered opposition. Tank battles became increasingly rare as German armoured units either surrendered en masse or were destroyed piecemeal by overwhelming Allied firepower. The few King Tigers still operational by this stage of the war fought from static positions, their crews having neither fuel for mobile operations nor realistic hope of affecting the war's outcome. American forces encountering these last defenders typically bypassed them when possible, leaving isolated German strongpoints for follow-on infantry forces to reduce while armoured spearheads continued advancing toward their final objectives. This tactical approach minimized American casualties while maintaining momentum that prevented German forces from establishing coherent defensive lines. American ordnance officers studying Pershing combat performance compiled data from crew reports, vehicle inspection records, and examination of destroyed German tanks. The analysis revealed patterns that validated pre-war theoretical calculations about 90mm gun effectiveness, while highlighting areas where actual combat results diverged from range testing predictions. The 90mm M82 armor-piercing round performed as expected against most German armor types, achieving reliable penetration against Panzer IV and Panther turret armor at standard combat ranges. Against King Tiger turrets, penetration probability remained good at ranges under 1,000 yards, but declined significantly at longer distances, where striking velocity decreased, and the probability of deflection off the curved mantlet increased. The glacis plate armor of both Panthers and King Tigers proved highly resistant to 90mm fire, with penetrations occurring only under exceptionally favorable circumstances involving close range, perpendicular impact angle, and manufacturing defects in the German armor plate itself. These findings confirmed that the M26 Pershing represented a significant improvement over the Sherman in anti-tank capability, while remaining inferior to the King Tiger in pure frontal protection and gun penetration performance. However, the analysis also emphasized that tactical effectiveness depended on factors beyond individual vehicle specifications. American tanks operated within a combined arms system that integrated armor with artillery, air support, infantry, and tank destroyers. This systematic approach allowed American forces to defeat technically superior German tanks through tactical coordination rather than relying solely on armor versus armor duels. German after-action reports from units that encountered Pershing tanks reflected confusion about American heavy tank capabilities. Early reports incorrectly identified Pershings as British Churchills or modified Shermans, demonstrating how unfamiliar the new American design appeared to German observers. Once German intelligence correctly identified the M26 and assessed its capabilities, reports noted with concern that American forces now fielded heavy tanks comparable in concept to German designs, though implemented with characteristically American emphasis on mechanical reliability over maximum performance. German tankers interviewed after the war expressed professional respect for the Pershing's balanced design approach. The vehicle sacrificed some armor protection and gun performance compared to the King Tiger, but gained substantial advantages in mechanical reliability, ease of operation, and logistical simplicity. These trade-offs reflected fundamentally different design philosophies between American and German armored vehicle development, with neither approach being objectively superior in all circumstances, but American methods proving more effective under the actual conditions of sustained mechanized warfare. The psychological impact of Pershing deployment on German tank crews deserves particular attention for understanding how technical capabilities translated into tactical effectiveness. King Tiger crews, who had operated with confidence derived from their vehicles' near invulnerability to Allied tank fire, now faced an opponent that could genuinely threaten them in frontal engagement. This knowledge fundamentally altered tactical calculations and risk assessment, making German crews more cautious and less willing to expose themselves to American fire, even when their superior armor might have protected them. The erosion of psychological security that thick armor provided proved as damaging to German combat effectiveness as any physical losses. Tank crews who believed their armor guaranteed survival fought aggressively, taking calculated risks to achieve superior firing positions and expose themselves to enemy fire while maneuvering. Crews who knew their armor could be penetrated fought defensively, prioritizing survival over mission accomplishment and hesitating to engage when tactical situations became uncertain. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.